Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Tony, that pause was wildly insufficient. Have you lost power? Is there a power outage at your house? Because the power pause was just not. That was like I'm running on like generator power pause. You want to start the show again or just?
No, I'll just let you know. I wanted to hurry up and get through it because I had the window open right next to me. And I knew if I waited too long, something, whether a mower or a train or a dirigible, was going to fly by and just totally. So, okay. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom.
No, too long.
How's it going?
Too long. Sorry. Do we need to do this
Tom,
a third time, Tony?
How's it going?
It's fine.
Tom,
it's fine, Tony.
How's it going?
Tony, we actually have to start a podcast. We should do. You know what we should do? You know what you and I should do together? A podcast about. I'm going to say Ohio State football, but that's just an opening, an opening offer here. But if you have other thoughts, I'm open to them. But otherwise, we could talk about Ohio State football. What, you want to do that? That sounds like fun.
Really, in this age when the basketball program is doing so well and is on the uptick, this is what you want to talk about, football?
An Ohio State podcast in this economy? Come on.
And you want to be my Ohio State podcast salesman? So let's talk about some Ohio State stuff. We got some listener questions to get to that we will get to, and we're not going to get through them by any stretch of any imagination. But first, we do need to talk about some news with regards to the transfer portal. Since we talked to you guys last, Noah Potter has hit the transfer portal, and then just on Monday, Andre Turrentine hit the transfer portal. Turrentine, a redshirt freshman, sophomore. Noah Potter, I believe, a fourth-year junior. Correct, Tom?
That sounds right.
Yeah, and really, we should. There are so many fourth-year juniors on this team that are transferring at this point. But I don't even, Bryson Shaw has already gone and found his new home at USC. But I do want to start with the safety situation because this is a position where Ohio State has lost Bryson Shaw, as I mentioned. He was playing some strong safety when we saw him earlier in the spring. Andre Turrentine was the only other strong safety to see action in the spring game. Josh Proctor got the start, and then it was Andre Turrentine. I was fast forwarding to the end of the game, trying to who came in after, Jalen Johnson. I don't know if he ever came in or wherever he played, but it's I'm trying to build a depth chart, and props to me for writing about the safeties, I believe, on Sunday, so thanks for that. But when you look at the situation at safety, Andre Turrentine playing he was a second string safety in the spring game, but Court Williams was out. Lathan Ransom, who I listed him in the free safeties in the depth chart, but that's only because there were already 5 strong safeties. I believe he's more of a strong safety in this defense. I think strong safety suits him well. So he's another one. Then Sonny Styles is coming in the summer, and I don't see him being a free safety. So you look at the situation for Andre Turrentine, he's going to be battling for the 4th string strong safety. And so this, while it's a little bit of a surprise because he's a redshirt freshman and you thought maybe he might wait, you look at the timing, the depth chart, and you start to understand.
Yeah, it wasn't a complete shock. He was definitely not, there are certain guys who kind of fit the profile. We've talked about that before, of the profile of the kind of guy who ends up transferring. And a lot of times it's that 3rd and 4th year guy who kind of hasn't made a real move on the depth chart. And Noah Potter sort of fits that to a certain degree. He was hurt a good bit, which played a role in that, obviously. Mm-hmm. But Jacoby Cowan, who transferred previously, he was someone who kind of fit that model as well. Andre Turrentine had been on campus less than 12 months. He was not an early enrollee last year. He showed up last summer. So he showed up in June last year, and now he's gone the following April. And, our buddy Dan Hope from 11 Warriors, got to give him credit. He put together the snap counts for the spring game. Dan Hope just doing God's work. That is, everyone else on the beat loves and appreciates you, Dan. Thank you for that. But he had Andre Turrentine with over 100 snaps in the spring game, which is nuts. I mean, you never see guys playing 100 snaps in the spring game. But, all the caveats you mentioned. Well, Josh Proctor was not going to play a whole lot. He was only in there for the kind of non-contact portions. Court Williams was not playing at all. Sonny Styles isn't there yet. I mean, there's a whole bunch of, you would look at that and go, wow, he was like getting showcased. This was an incredible opportunity for him. Why would he leave 2 weeks later? Well, there's a couple of caveats that go on to that, which maybe help explain it a little bit. This is not a departure that I think really materially impacts the depth chart for this fall. I was just thinking we need to do a show where we put together a depth chart, but it sounds like you're going to do that work for me. So fantastic. I can't wait to have you on the Morning Scoop and just let you just say, Tony, tell me about your depth chart, and then go go sit outside and enjoy the lovely spring weather. So that'll be fun. Look for that later on this week or next week on the Morning Scoop podcast feed. But, I think neither of these were like hugely, like groundbreaking transfers. It feels like for Ohio State, basically, there have been two kinds of transfers. Number one is Jameson Williams transfers to Alabama, and number two is all of the other transfers that have happened for Ohio State. And, even Jameson Williams, how much would he have played last year? How many receptions would he have had in that wide receiver room? I think, the answer to that is why Jameson Williams left. But, in terms of, and I'm sort of caveating this to the transfer portal era because everyone is screaming right now, what about Joe Burrow, dummy? Well, that was before the transfer portal era. So, the last few years, it's kind of been Jameson Williams and then sort of everyone else. And it feels like that's probably like, these are guys who both have the ability to go be impact players at another program. And does Noah Potter end up, for example, at Pittsburgh with his Ryan Jacoby, who he played high school football with at Mentor High School? Does he end up playing at Pitt? Like, he could be an impact player potentially at Pitt. Andre Turrentine is from Tennessee. Memphis. Yeah. Does he end up down at Memphis with Matt Barnes? Does he end up? Maybe he ends up at Cincinnati with Kerry Combs. There's a bunch of opportunities like that, and yet you think both of those guys have the opportunity to potentially be impact players at that kind of level. But it doesn't seem like these are things that necessarily are going to really be groundbreaking things for this year's Ohio State team.
And Noah Potter shows up at Ohio State, enrolls as a defensive end, and is wearing 97, which was a thing that makes you take notice. And you follow the Bosas, and you're going to start wearing a 97. Just be careful with that. And he understood that. And it's it certainly is not why he did. Like, it's just a coincidence. That's all. But you wear the 97, you're going to have some expectations. He, after his freshman year, then I think was moved to defensive tackle. And then, of course, last year was out with the injuries and the eye thing. And, we saw him in the spring game play a little defensive tackle, play quite a bit of defensive end, has some versatility there. He's a big guy, 6'6", 275 or so, and certainly has some ability. But the depth chart at Ohio State on the defensive line is it's tough. And when you are a guy who is playing two positions, that means you don't really have a home. And if they view you as a guy, well, we can put him here, we can put him there when we're missing our fourth guy. It's like, well, that's a big bold neon letters written on the wall for you. So he's one of those guys where I think he can find a home where he can play. That now gets them down to 85. But when you look at the formula of who transfers, like, I don't think he is their last one. And players have until May 1st to get into the transfer portal and have immediate eligibility. Not that they can't enter after and get that eligibility. It just requires waivers and schools willing to work with you. Ohio State has been willing to work with players before, so it wouldn't be unheard of to see somebody transfer after May 1st. But Tom, I don't think this is the end of the transfers this year. We don't need to speculate on names, but just probably prepare people for more.
Yeah, and so May 1st is Sunday, so assume by end of Saturday night is kind of when your time is. It certainly feels like there are probably other guys who at least are thinking about it right now. Do they leave or do they not? We'll find out. But this is, if you can do it without having to deal with the paperwork and go through the transfer to the appeal process, because like we saw that last year with Paula E. and Aoteote, which is like, this is like the easiest, cleanest, like the objection that the NCAA had was he put his transfer paperwork in before the one-time transfer exception was granted. Then they granted the one-time transfer exception. But because his was in before then, it was like, well, I don't know. Should he get it? Do you think he's deserved? Do you think he's earned it? It's like, that is the dumbest possible argument. And it dragged on for so long into fall camp and, ended up probably hurting his ability to contribute to the team early in the year. If you can avoid all that nonsense by getting your stuff in by May 1st, like I would expect, not necessarily a flood from Ohio State, but just a flood of transfers this week, just in general, from all across the country. And, you're going to see people who don't necessarily know about that rule writing about how this is an epidemic. And this is, people freaking out about like, oh my goodness, if this, this is like the disco stew. If these trends continue, if these trends continue, every player in Division I will have transferred by the end of June. Like, well, the trends aren't going to continue because there's an artificial deadline coming up. But yeah, don't be surprised if there is another 1 or 2 or, whatever, 3 or whatever the number is from Ohio State in the next couple of days. And then, the interesting question is coming back the other direction. Are they going to add someone? Because, we have talked about Parker Lewis, the kicker from USC. Is he someone who they might potentially bring in? Is there someone else on the transfer market? Because there is sort of limited utility to keeping the, open scholarships this, at the start of a year, like banking scholarships for future years, because the math is so complicated right now because of the transfers, because of all that kind of stuff. You used to just sort of be able to bank scholarships and just like, oh, we're going to give it to a walk-on this year. Like, that's cool. If they want to give a scholarship to a walk-on this year, like that would be awesome. But in terms of like future scholarship math, banking scholarships does not necessarily make as much sense as it did, back in like the Jim Tressel era, when the numbers were a lot easier to calculate and there were a lot fewer moving parts and all that math.
Well, and there was somebody on the message board saying, do you think there's any pressure to give Toby Wilson a scholarship? And Toby Wilson is a redshirt freshman walk-on son of Kevin Wilson, but he's been in the 2-deep at various times. And now being a university employee, I believe he still goes to school free. That used to be the old, that used to be the old way. I don't know if it's still the current way, but regardless, Kevin Wilson can afford to send his kid to Ohio State. So there's no pressure to put him on scholarship. Plus, you're talking about banking those scholarships, and you don't. It's rare to give a second-year walk-on, a scholarship. Usually, it's the guy in his last year where you're going to get that scholarship back, because you don't want the situation where like CJ Saunders got it as maybe a 3rd or 4th year guy, and then there was like, are they going to be a number crunch? Are they going to have to take a scholarship back and give it to somebody else who they need on the field more? And so it becomes one of those things where you don't want to give it and then take it back to give to somebody else. I do think that they will be under, but as I've said before, like this isn't one of these things where you're not necessarily shopping at Pier 1 or whatever. A lot of times this is it's the hand-me-down store. It's Goodwill, where you're not going to get a starter necessarily. You might just be looking for that 4th quarterback on scholarship who has played, that can be the emergency guy you never want to use, but also don't want to not have.
Yeah, and that's, that feels like one of the spots that they might bring someone in, because that's, you've seen them bring in Chris Chuganoff before, you've seen them bring in Gunnar Hoke before, and, Chuganoff played a lot more than Hoke did over the years, and, Hoke, I think, was sort of a victim of the 2020 pandemic and all that kind of stuff, but, Chuganoff played some, not, it was mostly garbage time when he was playing, but he played some significant minutes for Ohio State over the years. The quarterback depth chart this year is such that they probably don't need someone, but that's, if you have an open scholarship and there's someone who you think might be a good cultural fit, even in terms of like bring this guy in and then, hey, maybe this guy's a GA in the next year, maybe this guy's can be a QC guy down the line, like great, like, and sorry, I'm going to define my terms here in case you're not familiar with the minutia of college football staffing. GA is a grad assistant. You're going to graduate school at Ohio State, and then you're getting paid about 13 cents an hour to do kind of the grunt work behind the scenes. QC is a quality control guy. That's another one where it's not one of the 10 countable coaches, but you're doing you're just kind of grinding film and that kind of stuff. It's sort of similar to an analyst. There's a bunch of stupid different rules that I really don't want to get into. and will probably screw up if I do. So let's just move on. But if you can find someone who's a fit like that, like great, do that. That's what I mean. This is you may remember Gardner Minshew at Washington State. Gardner Minshew transferred to Washington State, but before he transferred to Washington State, his initial plan was he was going to transfer to Alabama, and he was not going to be starting at Alabama. He was just going to be kind of like the fourth string quarterback and learning under Alabama's coaching staff and potentially being some kind of taking that kind of a role with Alabama after he graduated. So, this would definitely not be an unprecedented thing. That is definitely one of those spots where I think that, if they bring in Parker Lewis, maybe one quarterback, if there's another offensive lineman that they love, I don't think there's a Jonah Jackson out there this year that I've seen at least. But if there's someone like that they can bring in, sure. There aren't that many holes they need to patch on this team. And, a lot of these things are just kind of like nice to haves rather than like true needs. But, if you have an open scholarship, it wouldn't, that's not a bad way to use it, certainly.
And I know people are going to look at Alabama and say, well, look what they keep landing. But like you said, there aren't many needs. Like Jahmyr Gibbs, the running back from Georgia Tech, transfers to Alabama, is going to have a huge year. Ohio State wasn't. They're not looking for a starting running back. They've got two. They weren't under the gun like Alabama was. The Jamison Williams, Ohio State had him, and he obviously wasn't needed. He felt he wasn't needed. He had to go somewhere that he was, and so a lot of this is just Ohio State has not better depth. It's just the players that are in there aren't necessarily what they're looking for at this point, and trying to find an offensive lineman at this point. Well, here's the thing. You're probably not going to start. We're looking for a 6th, 7th, 8th guy who might be thrown into the situation. And that guy's like, or I could just go and start every game at Purdue or Tennessee or wherever. Like there's not a lot of enticement in terms of opportunities and starting jobs because Ohio State has a lot coming back. And so, it's bad timing. But also there's been some proof in what Alabama is doing in terms of the transfers. So then they become a market in and of themselves just by the past successes of other people.
Yeah, and it does kind of become a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. And Ohio State has had its own transfer successes. And Jonah Jackson we mentioned earlier, and there was a quarterback from Georgia. I can't remember his name, but I think he turned out okay-ish at Ohio
Trey
State.
Sermon?
Yes, Trey. Now he was actually a running back from Oklahoma. I'm surprised you didn't know that, but yes, Trey Sermon also worked out okay. Record-setting running back for Ohio State. And this is, it's when you are shopping in this part of the market, it is much easier to, find the guys who went to Power 5 schools and are now looking for maybe more immediate playing time at a Group of 5 type school. If you were a MAC team, potentially finding a guy who went to a Big Ten school and then is looking for an easier path to the field. There's a lot more of those guys out there than there are the guys who were just completely missed in the recruiting, the recruiting process. JJ Watt, for example, who went to Western Michigan, Michigan, I think. And Central. Then, was it Central? Okay, Central Michigan. And then transferred to Wisconsin. That obviously was prior to the transfer portal era, but there are a lot more guys at the Big Ten level who then go, well, I'm going to take one step down the ladder and start playing immediately. There's a lot more of those than there are J.J. Watts and Justin Fields and Jamison Williams and Jonah Jacksons and Henry To'oTo'os and on and on and on, like those guys. But yeah, I think that's something that Ohio State is always going to lose in quantity more guys to the transfer portal than they get. Same thing for Alabama, same thing for Georgia, same thing for all the other teams kind of at the top of the sport. But on the whole, also, I think, if it's a 4-for-1 trade and you get a Justin Fields back, you're still coming out ahead on that deal.
And when they have shown that they need somebody, because you mentioned those 3 big transfers, they needed them. They needed a starter on the offensive line. They got Jonah Jackson. They needed a starter at quarterback. They went and got Justin Fields. The other guy competing with Trey Sermon for that starting job was Master Teague, and he was unproven as a starter. So, when they do land the big guys, it's as I was saying with Alabama, the opportunity is there. And so that's why I've said in the past, like if all of these quarterbacks at Ohio State transfer and they have nobody coming back or they have a true freshman coming back, Ohio State is going to be able to go get a transfer quarterback who would probably, like, they'll even be able to land somebody like who wasn't even thinking of transferring, but you're like, well, I could go play at Ohio State. Of course, yeah, I'll go do that. And so I don't think they're ever going to go into a situation where they're starting a true freshman quarterback unless they absolutely want to, because they believe this guy is better than any other option and because he is truly legit. And Tom, I'm just going to make a prediction. It's probably going to be Ryan Day's son.
Yeah, I think he's still a 2020 boy. Let me guess, 2028 maybe. I don't know. I don't want to think that far into the future, but yes, they'll. Yeah, I think there's a decent possibility they will find someone in the portal to come step in. I mean, you go through the guys who they've brought in the portal: Noah Ruggles, Tanner McAllister. I mean, like all these guys who we're talking about, in addition to the people we talked about before, like all of these guys have been kind of immediate impact guys. They've done a very good job targeting and identifying guys, and the ones who haven't necessarily been immediate impact guys, like Paula Teote, talked earlier about some of the external factors that may have led into that in terms of the NCAA delaying his stuff. And then he's had some health stuff, and that's not necessarily on him that he has not been an immediate impact guy. There's been a lot of external stuff that he's had to deal with as well. So, but yeah, I think if they bring someone in, I think that has generally borne out over the years that Mark Pantoni is good and his staff are good at evaluating not just high school players, but also college players, and figuring out who is a good fit for the Ohio State staff. So yeah, it's worth probably remaining optimistic, even if the numbers in terms of out versus in are seem like they're working against Ohio State. Tony, we should really start doing some listener questions because our listeners barraged us with questions, and we will never dig ourselves out if we don't start. So let's start with at Potato Shirts. What is the best online source of box scores? Do either of you crunch your own analytics? Tony, do you crunch your own analytics? I suspect I know the answer.
I use a grinder. Throw some analytics in, throw some numbers in there. I grind it, and it comes back just a bunch of crumbs. A lot of times what I'll do is I do not crunch my own analytics. No pivot tables or anything like that on my Excel spreadsheets. I am always looking for good online sources of stats and stuff. However, my go-to is like cfbstats.com, but that's not box scores. A lot of times for box scores, I'll just ESPN because they have everything, but the pop-ups are so annoying, and the autoplay. But mostly I'll go to the school websites for like the full stats book. But I know you've got the game on paper.
Yeah, and I'm with you. You go to the actual school source because all of these other sites are just pulling the data from the school. So if you go to the original source, you avoid any sort of weird data errors. In terms of overall, like advanced analytics, I'm a big believer in SP Plus. That's the one that Bill Connolly founded. He's with ESPN now, but this is not ESPN. I'm sure everyone's going ESPN bias. Like, no, I think Bill just kind of does the math, and his stuff is generally very good and has been pretty predictive. His is like a forward-facing thing where it's sort of telling you based on initial performance right now, and opponent adjusted, per play basis. So you sort of you sort out the high tempo and low tempo teams. You sort of adjust for that. You adjust for the quality of competition. You filter out all the garbage time so that if you're giving up a 95-yard touchdown to Rutgers when you're up 60-0, it doesn't matter because no one cares. Like that's a really good metric overall. I like SP Plus a lot. The one you mentioned, GameOnPaper.com. That's like an automated thing, and it is a little wonky sometimes where you'll get weird numbers and stuff because they are just taking the live game stats in, but you get a lot of good, positive, immediate sort of live analytics on games. So like while I'm watching a game, you'll get all sorts of good, like advanced stats. And sometimes you look at it, you're like, I don't think that's right. But on the whole, it's generally pretty good. So yeah, that's another one that, so GameOnPaper.com. You can find that one. That's one that I always have tabs open during my college football viewing windows on Saturdays.
Another one I use is it's baseball reference, it's football reference, basketball reference, hockey reference. I'll just plug in a name, and Travion Henderson Football Reference, and you'll be able to get full stats and game by game logs, and you can do that with Andre Dawson Baseball Reference. And the I don't know what the parent company site is, but and because I'll just randomly look up old baseball players, and just like Kent Herbeck, 307 home runs. I don't know if that's what it is, but just random minutia stuff like that. The reference, the sites are all good too.
All right, yes, and I live on Baseball Reference during baseball season. That is a great site. All right, so we're going to do two more. First one from @BCSBuck. What was the worst Ohio State assistant coach hire in the Urban Meyer era besides Tim Beck? And this is an interesting one because I think I have the answer, and I think it's Taver Johnson. Ed Warner was a very good position coach who got bumped up to offensive coordinator, which he could not do. And so, if you want to say hiring him as an offensive coordinator, okay, that's an acceptable answer. But just bringing on staff, he was very good. He was Kerry Combs before Kerry Combs was Kerry Combs in that respect. Like he deserves a lot of respect for the work he did. And then he got to a point where it just was a little above his skill set at the coordinator level. So I still don't think that was a terrible hire. It was a bad move to bump him up, but the hire in and of itself was not a bad one. I think Taver Johnson is my answer there because you look at some of the issues they had at cornerback a couple of years ago, and this is a little bit of a trailing indicator where when you have misses in your position or group recruiting, you don't see that year. You see that 2 years down the line, or in the case of offensive line, sometimes 3 years down the line. That's when you sort of see why aren't there any good cornerbacks on this team? Like, and you have probably, dear listener, seen Ohio State teams where you were asking that question, and sometimes the answer is like everyone's hurt, and that is what it is. But they had a bunch of misses, they had a bunch of late flips, and there was a big drop off when Kerry Combs left and Taver Johnson took over as the cornerbacks coach. That was one where that's probably one that Urban would like to have all over again to do all over again. What about you?
I hadn't considered the Taver Johnson one. That's interesting. I don't even remember why now, but I put together a list of the defensive back recruiting at Ohio State since Kerry Combs arrived, and his last class, I believe it would have been the 2017 class, right? Because then he left after the 2017 season. Is that correct? No, Tom, right? Was he gone 2 years, 2018 and 2019?
Taver Johnson left after 2018, right? Oh, with Kerry Combs? Taver Johnson was there 17 and 18, I believe. I'm almost positive Taver Johnson was one of the ones that one of the guys we were talking to at the Rose Bowl who was, asking about his job status, which is an extremely cool thing we get to do, and in a great time in people's lives. Yeah. But I think he was part of that group with Shiano and Grinch and those guys.
But like Combs' last class, then I believe was Jeff Okuda, Sean Wade, Kendall Sheffield, Marcus Williamson, Amir Reap. Those are both like top 26 corners. And then you look past that and it's Marcus Hooker and it's Cameron Brown, who is a number 54 receiver, Seven Banks. The next 2 years, because 2019 there was nothing. Then 2020 it's Legend Cavazos and Ryan Watts, who was listed as a safety. Like they've had to work to get back into the cornerback recruiting. Last year was a home run with Ja'Kalen Johnson, Jordan Hancock, and Denzel Burke all being top 10 at the position. But that's a good one. I know a lot of people are going to say Zach Smith, and I think for what he did, like there are definitely other choices. I was thinking Everett Withers. I was thinking Bill Davis. Like Everett Withers brought in the passive defense. He was able to land Von Bell, which is good, but I don't really think he did much for the program in terms of defensive identity or anything like that. Bill Davis had a lot of linebackers. They got better when he left, I think. But the Taver Johnson is sneaky good, Tom. I hadn't even considered that, and I think you might be right about that. Now, would we all agree that the true answer would be Tim Beck? Because I think that's immediately where I would go to.
Yeah, I think he's a good answer. Tim Beck is just one of those guys who just sort of falls into the like Scott. Who's the coach of Bowling Green right now? Scott Leffler. The Scott Leffler class, where it's just like you follow his career around and he keeps getting like jobs at big name programs, and it's like, but they've been bad everywhere he's gone. Like at some point, there's some correlation and causation thing going on there where it's like, it's probably at some point it stops being a coincidence. At some point you're just like offensive Bob Diaco. And that's kind of like Tim Beck, like you go through and it's like he's got all those Nebraska quarterbacks who look like they're throwing javelins back in the day, and it's like none of these offenses were particularly good, and none of these quarterbacks went on to do anything. And like at some point, like you're at Ohio State, you're at Texas, you're at places where you have access to really good talents, and you're not getting good results. Like at some points, this stops being a coincidence. Bill Davis is another one. There is a certain profile of coaches where you look at, just pull up their Wikipedia page, and if all their career stays are like 1 to 2 years, like that's not necessarily completely guarantee that this is not something that's going to work out. But if like there's a real habit of 1 to 2 years every single place you are, like there's probably something behind that pattern, which is not necessarily something that's great. So that's something you can kind of keep an eye on in terms of future hires. But yeah, there are plenty of answers here, and there's you mentioned one there where there's a whole longer conversation that I really don't want to have. So let's just keep moving on to the next question, which is one you can completely carry us on because last question from at DJK24129. I have to punt on this one because this is your area, not mine. Who makes it out of Better Call Saul alive? Jimmy, Kim, Nacho.
Tom, here's where you're going to use excuses of, I have family, I have coaching. Like, you watched Breaking Bad. You enjoyed Breaking Bad, correct?
Mm-hmm. I did. It was a great show. I like Bob Odenkirk's work.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Show?
Mr. Show, yes. I have I have watched a couple episodes of that, and I haven't gotten through the whole thing. So I will apologize for work-life balance and putting my family first and all that. That's on me, and
be better.
Once again, I'm very sorry.
But you should watch it because now, like after last season, they're eventually back to the Breaking Bad timeline or whatever. So it's definitely worth watching. Now, who makes it out alive? Now, Tom, I don't want to spoil anything for you, but there are some points where they'll do flash forwards where Saul is like past his lawyer life and he's in hiding basically. Because in one of the episodes of Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul, he said like eventually I'll be like living in Omaha, Nebraska, working at a pretzel place, not an Auntie Anne's, but one of those places. And so that's basically what he is. That's where he is now. So obviously he makes it out of the past of Better Call Saul alive because he's living another life. I think he's in danger though of making it through the entire episode, the entire show alive. Kim, Tom, who you don't know, you would eventually. I think everybody loves Kim, and she has started to break bad.
So she's the Skylar of this show. Is that what I'm hearing?
No, Tom, that is not. And if you say that, not only will I get angry with you, many other people were, but she is starting to break bad. And since we never hear about her or any word of her in Breaking Bad, the thought has always been like, does she make it out alive? And so there's questions there. Now, if Nacho gets killed, I am going to be furious, Tom. Furious. Because I know they're not really interested right now in doing a third show. But Tom, when I tell you a show with Nacho, give that to me. I will take that show with Nacho. And if they want to make it Nacho and Kim, perfect. And they have nothing to do with each other. But who thought Saul and Walter White would? But eventually they did. So who makes it out alive? I don't know. And that's the great thing about the writers. You don't know what they're going to do. I think everybody makes it out, but that seems like it's too happy of an ending. And so if I had to, I just feel like if they kill Kim, that's, for one, it's sexist. Let's just put that out there. You know, why are you killing the one lady and everybody else lives? But I don't, if I'm going to put money on these, which I wouldn't because I don't have a good feel for it, even though I watch every episode 7, 8, 9 times. I kind of think everybody's going to make it. And I think Kim ends up in hiding. Nacho is technically alive during Better Call Saul because Saul mentions Nacho the first time that he comes into contact with Walt and Jesse when they have their ski caps on and they're threatening him to shoot him out in the desert. And he said, who sent you? Did Nacho send you? Was it Nacho? Was it Lalo? And so Nacho is theoretically alive, but he could be on the run or whatever. So I think, Tom, everybody makes it, but maybe Art imitating life, like Saul has the heart attack and dies.
That's
from all the stress. He's under a lot of stress.
Yeah, he is under a lot of stress. That's my advice to you would not to be a attorney for drug dealers. That would be that's my personal life advice to you, and I can give that to you even without having watched the show. That's just good general life advice. You just in case people were quite confused, the thing that you were just talking about where he mentions Nacho, that of course was on Breaking Bad, not Better Call Saul.
Right.
You said the wrong thing. I just want to make sure people understood. But yeah, I think, Tony, being optimistic, it's been a hot topic recently. Being optimistic for the characters in this whole cinematic universe, it always works out great. So yes, I would encourage you to be very optimistic. I'm sure everything's going to work out fantastic.
Just like on The Sopranos.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So, yeah, you go back to Breaking Bad. Obviously Walt had to die. We knew that. Like, he was going to end up how he did. But Jesse got away. Like, spoilers, so they can do.
That show ended like 10 years ago. I think we're out of the spoiler range at this point.
And they've also had a movie since where he's alive in it. But so I'll say it seems like a fool's bet to say all of them, but I can't pick one, so I guess I have to say all. And so this is a 3-leg parlay, Tom. I don't feel great about. I'll just put it that way. But I don't know who to bet against. Let us do that. It is lunchtime here in Ohio, so I want to thank you all for joining us as always. Thank you for the questions. We've got enough for now. We're still going to work our ways through this, and obviously as news breaks, we'll also talk about that. But thank you for joining us today, and we will talk to you all later.